Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Do you know your why? Maybe Steve Curtin can help. Steve, thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation, Bill.
Steve, your book is entitled The Revelation Conversation. Now, most books I can tell right from the beginning, goals for success, something like that, or the 3 rules of success. But what does that mean, the Revelation Conversation?
Well, the Revelation Conversation is a framework for a conversation between a supervisor, a manager, a leader, and a member of his or her team. And the intent of the conversation is to build a bridge between the organization's why, the single highest priority for that employee, and his or her daily work activities. So that's the bridge. We're building a bridge between purpose, why we do something, and our daily work activities, which is essentially what we do and how we do it.
So would I be correct or incorrect to say, okay, I bring my employee over, I say, Joe, here's what I want you to do. These are the pink forms. You fill these out in the morning. These are the bill requests. You fill these out in the afternoon. You take an hour for lunch. And then when you get back, return calls for any of the clients. I just given them 3 things to do. Am I keeping them busy? Am I doing the right thing?
Well, in that scenario, Bill, what you're doing is you're creating a competent employee who knows what to do and knows how to do it. In other words, he possesses adequate job knowledge and he demonstrates sufficient job skills. As a result, he is competent or he is qualified to reliably execute job assignments. But that's only 2/3 of his role. There's another aspect of his role, another dimension of his role, which is his job purpose. And I didn't hear that in your comments.
And absolutely right, because I, to be honest, I never think of that. And I don't think I've ever heard someone answer that question that way. So maybe I'm the outlier, or you tell me.
You're not alone, Bill.
Okay, good. Glad to know that, because then we got the rest of the show to work this out. In fact, if I've read your book, only something like 2% of managers or leaders actually know the mission statement of their company. Is that correct?
Well, that figure fluctuates. I have been around organizations where a higher percentage is aware of their mission, their vision, their purpose. Different organizations have different names for their guiding statements. But I've also been in situations where I have actually polled leaders firsthand, and that number has come in, sadly, less than 2%. I had 4 out of 222 senior leaders in one setting. So if you do the math, that's 1.8% knew what their one-sentence organizational mission was. And that's too bad, because if they're disconnected from mission, you can bet that those frontline hourly employees they supervise are equally disconnected.
Now, Steve, the way I'm thinking of this, and tell me if I'm wrong, isn't that like we go to play some type of game, and maybe basketball or soccer or baseball is new to me, and that's like saying play the game but not telling me the rules. Am I going for a goal, a home run, a speed? Am I running around the bases for speed like a track star or a tennis player? Isn't that kind of silly, or it kind of makes no sense, right? To be playing the game without knowing why?
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree that most organizational leaders are wandering the wilderness with respect to mission, vision, purpose. And by extension, most frontline hourly employees are flying blind, or at least they have blinders on. And what I mean by that is their blinders allow them to see what to do and how to do it. In other words, they possess adequate job knowledge. They can consistently demonstrate sufficient job skills. They are deemed competent or capable by their immediate supervisor to execute job assignments, but they are completely unaware of the single highest priority of their job role, and they're unaware of it because nobody is talking about it.
So let me be a problem maker and say, but Steve, I'm doing everything you told me to do. You're my boss. You told me to fill out the red forms, the pink forms, take lunch, and then return phone calls. I'm doing everything all day long. What's wrong with that? And why aren't you thinking I'm doing a good job?
Well, and you're likely doing a very good job. It sounds like you're highly competent. And in my first book, we're talking about the Revelation conversation now, but back in 2013, I published a book called Delight Your Customers. And one of the anecdotes in that book was based on a conversation I had with a restaurant operator. And he said, Steve, he said, my superstar employees constantly go above and beyond for the customer. He said, but then when I point things out to other employees who are not superstars, they tell me, Zane, that's his name, Zane, but I do everything I'm supposed to do. And they're right. They do everything they were hired to do. They do everything they were trained to do. They do everything they were paid to do, but they don't do anything above and beyond that. And what you're hired to do, trained to do, and paid to do are job functions. And that is possessing adequate job knowledge, demonstrating sufficient job skills. But there's this whole other realm of your job. And many superstars stumble into this realm accidentally with no help from their immediate supervisor. They find another gear on their own. But the other dimension of every job role that we're talking about is job essence, which is the ability to reflect through actions and behaviors the single highest priority of the job role. Superstars do it all the time.
Can you give us an example, Steve, something we would recognize every day, whether we go for coffee to a store or the supermarket, maybe?
Well, yeah. Let me think. If I went to buy a cup of coffee, and let's say I ordered a macchiato, and the barista, what happens a lot of times is you go in, you order a macchiato, they make you a macchiato, you pay for the macchiato, you provide a form of payment or your phone, you get a receipt or an electronic receipt, you leave with your macchiato. So you've transacted and you have dealt with a capable or a competent employee. But to illustrate this, what if the employee said, while he or she is making your macchiato, before they hand you the macchiato, or maybe as they hand you the macchiato, they say, did you know that macchiato is an Italian word that means marked or stained? Your macchiato is marked with a teaspoon of milk. So in doing that, that barista has elevated his or her performance from ordinary to extraordinary by choosing. This is always a choice. It's voluntary. It's volitional. It's elective. But they have chosen to seek out this knowledge and then to share it. I call it unique knowledge, to share something interesting, something memorable, something refreshing with the customer to make a positive, lasting impression. That would be an illustration.
Now, Steve, what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, but I'm also going to say that if you come up and talk to me about this, other than the fact that I have the luxury of having gone through your book and know what's coming, why, as the manager, am I concerned with this? I have that good employee who's doing A, B, and C. And as you said, all of the functions are done all day. They're doing what they should do. They check the boxes. They come in on time. They leave on time, et cetera, et cetera. Who is that helping? Is that helping the employee if they get a better why, WHY for their work and understand it? Or is it helping me as the business manager, owner?
I think it's helping both. And I'll be specific. And in fact, I'll invoke the last illustration I used. Every time I use my Starbucks app, I get a message that prompts me to leave a tip based on my last interaction with the Starbucks employee. You asked, does it benefit the employee? Well, I think it makes their job a lot more interesting than executing transactions all day, to have meaningful, short. Everybody's busy. Customers are busy. Baristas are busy. Just short conversations like the one I illustrated. I think it makes the job more interesting. If there's an opportunity for a gratuity in a setting, in a coffee shop or in a restaurant or in a hotel, I think that by willfully demonstrating these exceptional customer service behaviors, I think you position yourself for a higher tip. So I think that all that benefits the employee. They're more engaged, getting more in tips. And it certainly benefits the operation That's why we do these things. We do these things to make work interesting, to engage employees, and then also to create loyal customers. Bain & Company, the consulting firm, calls these loyal customers promoters. And according to Bain's research, these promoters, these loyal customers, are 80 to 90, or they're responsible rather, for 80 to 90% of the positive word of mouth, or using a computer, word of mouse, in terms of the Yelp comments, for instance, and ratings. So 80 to 90% of the positive word of mouth. Also, they have higher repurchase rates, and they're less price sensitive. So these are characteristics, these are traits of your most loyal customers. That's another reason to do this.
And that's a very good reason. If you said 80 to 90% and it's not price sensitive, that's a win-win-win, certainly for the business. And if it makes the employee's life a lot easier, altogether something we want to know more about. Steve, at this point in the show, we're going to take a brief break and let our audience know that if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Steve Curtin, Curtin. His book is The Revelation Conversation. And Steve, we're going to ask you, one, where we can get the book, and two, if there's a website where we can learn more.
Yes, you can purchase the book wherever books are sold, including Amazon.com and your local bookstores. And you can find me at my website, which is my name, and you were gracious enough to spell it, and that is Steve Curtin, Curtin.com.
And Steve just gave you some very functional reasons. It's going to increase the bottom line. You're going to have happy employees. You're going to have customers coming back. He's going to be telling us more, but this is something you may want to look into if you're finding you're not retaining enough customers, or they're leaving you for the guy or woman across the street. Maybe it's time to take a look at that revelation conversation and see, and make life better for the employees too. It'll be a lot more fun and a lot better business. Steve, let me ask you, I think I read in your book, and I've read it from obviously many of our other guests, so many employees today are what's termed not engaged employees. And I think your number you gave us in the book was something like only 36% are engaged, so that leaves another 2/3, 2 out of every 3 employees who are not engaged in the business. Can you talk a little bit about that and how this conversation would help change that?
Yes, by connecting an employee's job to more than just the transactions, more than just being process focused, more than just executing reliably these transactions all day. Many employees describe their jobs as boring and monotonous and tedium. And what this does, Bill, is it really reveals another dimension of the job role that most frontline employees, at least most that I talk to, are completely unaware of in the absence of a conversation with their immediate supervisor. And that's where this framework is meant to support the supervisor in making this connection between the why of the job role, the purpose, which, by the way, is where the party's at. This is where creativity, I think about the coffee barista, where the creativity happens, where the personality shines, where one's individual flair can manifest and can flourish, is in this dimension of the job role. But sadly, most employees are completely unaware of it.
I like your expression, this is where the party is at. I think that's a great title for your next book if you're planning one. I would certainly pick it up if it's in the business section and say, wait, where is the party at? What has this got to do with the party? So I think, but I see what you're getting at. Now, there was a term in the book, and I always like the inside terms because it makes me feel smarter. And you mentioned something about the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I wrote down below that we are not very good at knowing what we don't know. And I thought, gee, that's interesting. I want you to expound on that a little bit. And how does that fit in here?
Yeah, well, the Dunning-Kruger effect, which we have Ivy League school there in New York, Cornell, to thank for this. A professor and an assistant at the time, they're both professors now, Mr. Dunning and Mr. Kruger, identified that most of us overestimate our competency. I know I'm guilty of that. And the way I linked this sort of tendency to overcompensate for our true knowledge is I linked it to the illustration I shared earlier. I opened that section telling the story about these 222 top leaders, senior leaders from a sophisticated billion-dollar technology company. They were all flown into Chicago. We had a little naive learning activity up front. I partnered with my client to perform this prior to my presentation. We asked them all the simple, the one sentence corporate mission statement. And as I said earlier, only 4 of the 222 knew what it was. There were dozens of cards that were blank. At least one senior executive wrote on his index card, "I don't believe we have a corporate mission statement at this time." What I haven't revealed is that prior to this naive learning activity, I asked my client, how many of these senior leaders, this is in the weeks leading up to the presentation, how many will be fluent in the organization's single sentence corporate mission statement? And he told me most. Now, where I went to school, most would be 51% or more. But what happened is less than 2% actually knew it. So that's the Dunning-Kruger effect in action.
It's funny. I started my career as a math teacher, and one of the things I used to tell the kids, if you know what you don't know, and they would look at me, and I'd get a very confused look for about 3 seconds, and then the brighter kids usually all of a sudden they would start grinning, because then I could focus on that and gear the lesson toward it and help most of the kids. And it just struck me that after all these years, that comes back, and you point that out to us. Could we use the word priority? And I think you use that in your book. Is that a way to express to people what this is all about? What is the priority of your job? Like, let's say a retail clerk. To me, it would be good customer service. I trust they're doing their functions, if I buy a shirt, putting it in the box or giving me a receipt, etc. But if they're treating me well, or if they go out of the way and say, well, let me see if I can find an extra large or an extra small shirt, if that's what you're looking for, that's the person I really appreciate. And I'm probably going to come back to them next time because they went out of their way for me. So would that be a word we could use to kind of guide our understanding of this principle? Priority?
Yes, in the book, I refer to it as the single highest priority of the job role. And in most cases, my background is with Marriott hotels, and so I'll use a hotel example. In most cases, most frontline hourly employees estimate, they sort of figure out for themselves, unless they recall the bullet points of their job description, which ordinarily they sign those and then they're filed away in their personnel folder and they don't see them again. But if they do recall them, they might recall, if they're a hotel housekeeper, for instance, that one of their bullet points, one of their priorities is to provide a clean guest room. That makes sense, sort of intuitive. You're a housekeeper, you need to prioritize a clean room. But I wouldn't stop there. And there's this notion in the book, I write about it, of probing to ask why. In other words, why do we have a clean room? Well, we have a clean room to meet expectations. Well, why is it important to meet customer expectations? Well, when we meet their expectations, their intent to recommend our hotel to others increases. Okay, well, why do we want people to recommend our hotels to others? Well, because according to Bain & Company, as I mentioned earlier, if somebody's willing to recommend us, somebody's loyal, they'll exhibit other loyalty behaviors. And then I'd say, well, like what? Well, in addition to recommending us to others by word of mouth or mouse, as I said earlier, they would be perhaps less price sensitive. Is that good when you're setting hotel rates? Yes. Their return and repurchase rates are higher. That's also good for hotels. It's good for every business. So it's to probe beyond the obvious. It's not a hotel housekeeper's single highest priority to provide a clean room. Single highest priority may just be to create a promoter of the hotel. Now that's number one. But before we move on for this, let me very quickly say it's not zero sum. It's not either or. It's not a clean room or focus on creating a promoter of the hotel. You really need to do both if you want to attract and retain and expand your loyal customer base.
Steve, before we go further, I'm getting more and more interested in this, but I want to let our audience know that if you're just tuning in and if you're fascinated as I am, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Steve Curtin, Curtin. His book is The Revelation Conversation. And Steve, once again, we're going to ask you where we can get the book and the website where we can find out more.
You bet. It's available on Amazon.com, in a neighborhood bookstore near you. And you can find me at my website, which is Steve Curtin, Curtin.com.
And it sounds like a fantastic way and also relatively simple for a lot of people. And I'm going to ask you that next. Is this just, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, but if someone's listening, could they go to work tomorrow and say in their 10-person accounting office, why are you doing this? And just as you did, keep asking that question, why, almost like a game, and just see what kind of answers they come out. And I'm assuming that the person doing this is the boss or the manager. Would that be a way to find out what people know or how they kind of assess their jobs?
Yes. And I actually like that idea. And I especially like it because what the supervisor is not doing is they're not abdicating or handing down the higher purpose of a job role. Rather, they are involving the frontline hourly employee in identifying, in clarifying, in revealing and articulating their single highest priority at work. And as you know, and as your listeners well know, with participation, active participation, comes buy-in and commitment.
Can I ask you, when you give a seminar on this and you talk to people as you did and how you introduced the subject at the beginning of the book, what is the reaction you get by the end of the seminar? And do people call you 2 weeks later and say, oh my gosh, I'm trying this and this just turned around our company? It's like we washed all the walls and cleaned everything in the physical equipment.
Well, I mean, I wish it happened like that. Anecdotally, I do hear from people, and I have received testimonials that are correlated with increases in Net Promoter Score, which for your listeners who are unaware of that metric, it is a KPI or a key performance indicator that is used across industries. We certainly use it in the hospitality industry, but the Net Promoter Score is an indication. It's a metric that measures customer loyalty based on their willingness to recommend our hotel or brand to a friend or colleague. So we have found correlations between the Revelation Conversation and Net Promoter Score. We have been able to isolate impact on customer satisfaction, and we have been able to isolate impact on revenue, on sales. And business owners are interested in all of those things: customer loyalty, customer satisfaction, and sales.
And I'm thinking of myself as you're talking. I'm someone who is price conscious, but if the person I'm dealing with does any of the things you're talking about, and also if they seem to be into their job, so to speak, that usually swings me over from the price conscious, because now I know I'm getting something better. I'm getting professional advice by someone who sees if everybody bought item one and it's not working too well and they're good enough to tell me, well, they just saved me a mistake. They saved me from coming back to satisfaction and wasted time. That's worth a few extra dollars, and I'd rather go for the more expensive option and be happy with it rather than spoil a vacation or take it out on the ball field and have it break down, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's on page 46 in your book. You give us 4 questions we can ask ourselves, and I think this makes it easy for any business person and the small dental office or accounting office. Can you go over those questions with us?
Yes, I can. I pose 4 questions, and these questions are more for individuals who may not work for a large international global, like this $1 billion global technology company I referenced earlier, or Marriott company I have background with. But if you work for a mid-size or a smaller company in particular that may not have an about page at the website that discloses the mission or the vision or the purpose, maybe it hasn't been articulated and you haven't codified a set of core values, these questions enable you to do that. So question 1 is to look at your job through the why lens, through a lens of purpose, and ask, what is my purpose at work? What is my single highest priority? And there's some questions and some coaching around that. Question 2 is, what values guide my actions and behaviors at work? So essentially, this is going to be a set of core values that influence how you act, how you behave, and how you make decisions at your place of work. The third question is linked to values, and it is, what purposeful actions and behaviors do I exhibit at work? So in other words, values inform your actions and your behaviors and your decision making. And what the third question does is it presses you to clarify your values beyond, and here's what people have a tendency to do, beyond simply making an imitative set of values. Like if you think about customer service, that's one of our values. Teamwork is one of our values. Excellence is one of our values. Well, guess what? Most companies have those as values. They're imitative. So they're not going to motivate me necessarily. But if I look at those values and I say, listen, let's add context to those values. Here's what the value is. And those are all worthy values, by the way. But let's give it context. How do we define excellence at our company, in our organization? How do we define teamwork? How do we define customer service? What does it look like? And then beyond that, how do we apply it? What do the behaviors look like? How do we know that we're exhibiting excellent customer service? How do we know that we're exhibiting excellence, whether it be product or service excellence? How do we know that we're working as a team? We need to have the behaviors. And that's what question 3 gets at. And then question 4 is, what is our aspirational goal? This is our North Star. It's the end of the rainbow. We're never going to arrive there, but we can create progress, movement, and momentum toward that aspirational goal.
Steve, I love it. And I think any company that follows those rules, or any even employee, is certainly going to put themselves on the fast track and move ahead quickly. Give us that website one more time before we wrap up.
You bet. It's stevecurtin.com. Steve, CURTIN.com.
And the book is The Revelation Conversation. You can make some quick changes in your business and find out you're having a lot more fun, a lot more engaged employees, and see that bottom line jump up. Steve, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Bill. Enjoyed it.
To our audience, I'd like you to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.